Welcome. My name is Byndon. I'm the chairman of More Board of Organization, which is a nonprofit in Omaha that deals with race equity as well as anti-racism work. More stands for Movement in Omaha for Race Equity. And with me today, we have two guests, Suzanne Doupnik, who we've interviewed before, and then her Sheila Kirsch, who's also been involved in racial awareness and dealing with racial journey and healing and so on. And so we invited both of them to talk about some of the issues. Suzanne is in the hospitality industry, kind of like deals with IT. And Sheila is kind of a business person who works in a number of different areas and so on. And I had a chance to meet both of them as we were doing some work about a couple of years ago dealing with racial healing and having conversations about anti-racism and what folks could do to help transform our community. So I invited them both to talk about some of their experiences and some of the current issues that are going on in the community, as well as issues of the day, whether it be critical race theories, white fragility, you name it. There's a number of issues out there that we need to be talking about to help bring people together in terms of some of these issues. So first, I guess I want to start off with you, Suzanne. If you can tell the viewing audience a little bit more about yourself.
All right. As Ajmal said, I work in hospitality in IT. I have worked remote for 15 years, and so COVID wasn't much of a change for me. But because I work from home, I have always been or tried to be active in the volunteer space because as a human, we all desire human interaction. And so I've always been heavy in volunteering. I have two teenagers now, and so that seems to be where most of my volunteering efforts go these days. But it was a lot through my children where my desires to really learn about race and learn about racism and uncover my own biases came into play, and why I continue to kind of fight for equality.
Good. Sheila, share a little bit more about yourself.
I am a small business owner. Basically, I consider it kind of a day spa, but it's just me individually providing self-care, body care services for people of the community.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. You know, one of the things that I oftentimes ask folks, and I guess based upon the journey that you're dealing with racial healing and so on, one of the things I think is very important is, how did you get involved? What was the main thing that got you involved in dealing with this issue? Because there's a lot of people who, they don't address these kind of issues, deal with racial justice and so on. But what was the thing that propelled you to get involved? And I'm asking each one of you that question. What was the aha moment?
I think for me is my children. With my kids becoming teenagers, with my being more awareness of it, getting to educate them also, and hopefully a lot further of education and more action than I was at this point able to do.
Yeah, I'm going to say my kids too, Ajmal. For me, it was when I was really starting to look at where I was going to send them to school. That questions first started popping up in my mind, and you know, we grew up in a very white environment, and so it definitely played a part in when I was starting to seek out where I was going to educate my kids.
By the way, would you get pressure by sending your kids to school if it was not predominantly white or integrated or, you know, all white? Is there feedback in your circles? I don't know that because I'm not in your circles per se, but is that something that white people push back at other white people? How do they do that? Like, why would your kids go there, or why you make
Absolutely. When Evan chose to go to Northwest, we absolutely had several parents question, why would you do that? Why
Just
would
straight
you
up come out and say it?
why would you send them there instead of 120th and Dodge?
Wow.
Now they wouldn't come out and say because it's black. They would just say it's not a good school.
They'll just say it just like that.
And because you know me, of course, I always push back. Why is it not a good school? like I would, push them to try to get them to say it. And most of the time they wouldn't say it. They would say, oh, it's got problems with gangs, or it has problems with, but yeah, several. And not as much to me as it was to him directly, his friends
Wow.
telling him that he was going to the ghetto,
Wow.
essentially.
You mentioned that because I know some African Americans who may send their kids to suburban schools, and sometimes they hide it and they're scared. And then other times there are people who teach in the schools will send their kids to parochial private schools. And I don't necessarily, it's not the great barometer for some people because again, you send your kids where you can get a quality education. The issue is what are we doing to make education quality for all people throughout this whole community? And sometimes we want to talk about that. I want to switch up, go back to something that we had an interview last week. And there were some critical issues that were raised in an interview we did with a taping with another colleague of ours, and the three of us were there. And my question is, how have you handled racist or negative responses within your circle or your influence? Have there been anything that you can point to where somebody have said something racist or prejudiced, how you want to put it, and you push back? Can you talk to me about how you handle that? And Sheila, I'm gonna start with you a little bit.
Mine definitely was within family and some of extended family. This was kind of obviously back in 2020 during all the time with COVID, things were shut down. So I was able to be on social media a lot more. So you saw a lot of interaction of comments, pushbacks. And one of a post I made, I was heading to one of the protests against Klein. And I had an aunt of mine ask what it was for, and kind of went and told her what it was for. I had other people comment in there. Some of the other comments that were starting to come through, you could tell were starting to raise the temperature, I guess, of what was going on. And her comment came to me was, if we stop talking about racism, it'll go away.
I remember that.
And I remember a comment from somebody, and I think I even might have talked to my sisters for a little bit of like, do I respond? Do I put myself? And I did. And I think social media can be an easy way to talk without face-to-face. And basically I came back with, well, if we don't talk about cancer, maybe that'll go away. Right. And I instantly got blocked. And
now help me. Now I'm kind of slow on the social media. When you say blocked, that means they won't talk anymore about it.
Yeah, we are like cannot connect whatsoever through any. And she followed me on other social platforms, and I was taken out completely, like on all social platforms. Unfortunately, I believe it was a couple months later, her husband passed from COVID. And realizing where a lot of my extended family was and going to where the funeral was for me, I thought it was just best not to go. Going into a place where you're supposed to be sympathetic to the family, I don't think I was going to be there at that point, because I knew into the territory I was walking into. For me, I might have been more vocal. And again, I'm to a point, I think, with family that I don't need that closure. Not that I don't want to, I just, for me, I don't see them changing their thoughts, their process, their patterns, any of that. So yeah, it's basically kind of, you realize that some of that you won't be a part of anymore, and
you move on. Yeah. Suzanne, did you have any incidents that jump out at you in terms
Not really. I'll be honest, not anything that succinct that like she had.
Okay. I'm constantly referred to as our school system as a plantation school system because they don't allow freedom of speech or thought on certain racial issues. I'm not saying they don't have, they restrict all of it, but I can see what comes out of there. The people who work there, that they go to a certain ceiling and they stop. And I can say that emphatically, just being for many years in this community. And also, there's a certain amount of way they learn about racial issues, which is somewhat limited. Again, if you want to know how institutions and people operate, look at the end results. I mean, in other words, you go to a factory and you look at the end result, you know what's been made in that factory. And I think the same thing happens in schools. And so my question is, how can we learn about racial history and issues if we don't talk about some of the past things so we can grow? And again, Sheila, something what you just said earlier kind of resonates with me. And one quick point I'll raise is, and then we'll go back to the question, but we at Moore had an account with Dundee Bank, and I was trying to get on the internet and went to the bank to get some information, and the banker said he would give me the passcodes or whatever to get on there as the chair of the board to check out the bank. He didn't do that. So about a week later or two, I called again, and he says, I'll take care of it, and I did not. So I called our treasurer up, and she made some comment about she'll go to the bank with me as a white woman to help me get on there. And I wasn't sure she's been facetious or whatever, but I'm like, you got to be kidding. So then I raised the issue with the vice chair, who's African American, and basically said, Jamal, let's switch banks. And so when I went to the bank, I basically closed the account out and switched to another bank. But what bothered me, you know, in all my years of banking, and I have about 4 different accounts, I don't have that much money, I've never had a personal banker not call me back, okay? And Dundee Bank, I call them out, and they're no different than some other banks. But the fact is, as the chair of the board, I could not get access. And again, when you work on a board of directors or you work on an organization, you have to have checks and balance. And one of the things I learned a long time ago, even when you handle petty cash, you should always have another person just in case you get tempted. But that was, to me, was a blatant example of racism, and I will follow through with it more with a letter. But that hit me within the last month or so. So I'm gonna come back to that question and say, in a sense, you know, how can we deal with some of these issues of racial situations in our education system or whatever, if we don't talk about them to grow? But the reason I ask that is because it's just a challenging issue for us to wrestle with. So either one of you can respond to some of that from your own experiences.
I think for me, I think this is where white fragility comes into play for so many people, right? It's hard. It's hard for Black people, but it's hard for white people to read or learn about how awful we are.
Wait, help me. Use the word awful. Got to break that down a little bit more.
Well, you know,
awful. You got to give me specifics. That's like I said, interesting in some circles, you know.
Of the things that white people have done for generations, and you know, I'm talking more than just, you know, slavery and lynching. I'm talking redlining and segregation in schools and busing, and it's hard for white people to. I mean, it's hard for me, and I feel fairly. I don't want to call myself educated because I will always be learning, but you know, reading the book Caste comes to mind as most recently. Like, that was a tough read for me at times. I mean, I had to put the book down because I was so emotional over how horrific things were. You know, recently, a mutual friend of ours, Professor Patrick Jones, posted an article of, I don't know if you'd call it a museum, but it was a Black man who holds, I think it's in his own home, and it's like a museum that you can walk through and look at everything, but it specializes in Black caricature. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you saw that article he posted, but
I've seen some of them. I haven't seen that one.
And I found it fascinating because he's always thought provoking, right? He's always trying to get people to think and same as you, to have these discussions. And my initial reaction was, oh no, that's awful. Why would you ever show that stuff? Like, why would we make anyone relive? But then I saw that there were Black people commenting saying, this is our history. Like we can't hide it, right? We can't. Right. So I know we have to keep talking about it. And I've given up on the schools. I mean, I've given up on it being part of curriculum. I know I shouldn't, but I think it takes people like us to keep this conversation moving, because I don't trust the teachers.
Sheila, what's your experience?
The only thing I can think of with that is white people don't want to take responsibility. It's not, I know the past generations are the ones that have been maneuvering the way we're at today, but even white people today are still not taking responsibility.
Mhm.
Even, you know, I have someone specifically that she posts a lot of things, or she talks a lot about racism and equality and this, but then when it comes down to it, I don't see action. And I've kind of been pushing her, sending her different things of how she can get involved. I think that's, to me, that's where I guess, yeah, white people just don't want to take responsibility for it now.
Yeah.
And I don't, like Suzanne, you just said, like, kind of giving up on the educational system. Where do we step in and start working? And again, I think it's finding groups like this, finding ways that we can, and getting these groups out more known so we can join them. Because it was Suzanne that introduced me a few years ago to your class. It's constantly sharing the information.
Mm-hmm.
And people that want to, they'll listen, they'll start hearing. I think people are scared to take the accountability right now. Not scared, they just, why should we take accountability for what, you know, what our ancestors did? Well, we have to.
Yeah, as you share that, there's two things that hit me real quick. One, I was doing a training at Metro Community College on diversity or race issues, anti-racism, race equity. And at the end of the session, there were two white women who were suburbanite Omahans, and they say, how can we have Black friends or something like that, or friends of color? And so I looked over at my white colleague who was working with and says, well, you have to answer that because I can't answer that in a sense. That's something you need to answer. And my colleague went blank. I mean, literally he had nothing to say. There was other people in the audience, and it was kind of a strange conversation, but one of them said, you probably need to go to other parts of town to do that. Number one, participating in these cultural events that happen, and also maybe strike up a conversation with people at work or however. In some of these, I mean, one of these individuals worked in an all-white suburban area. There was no diversity. But my point is, I was struck by it, and they asked me for the question. No, you don't have to ask me because I'm the guy who's doing the teaching, and plus, I already got my 4 or 5 white friends, so I'm good in that area. That was a little joke there, get it? But my point is, some kind of white folks have to figure out how to notch the bar up among themselves, or challenge institutions and system. And also, it's like a healing process, you know, another word, recovery, you know, recovering racist, recovering sex, recovering homophobe. You got to start to come at it from a point of view that you can learn from other people. And as you become more comfortable with them, that can help and so on. I was going to ask you, and this is kind of related, and I don't, Susan, Sheila, you may answer this a little bit different because when we're talking about where you send your kids and so on, what is it like to be in an all-white circle? I assume some of you, both of you have individually been in places where in our city, maybe even our public funded government institution, which is apartheid and segregated many times, you've been all-white environment. I'm not saying that being an all-white environment is negative in and of itself, but what I'm saying in a sense is when you're constantly in that environment, what is it like for you? And again, many of us people of color don't know that until somebody explains it to us, but what is it like for you to operate in those environments or those circles?
Honestly, anymore, it's uncomfortable. I don't know how else to go with that right now. I might have to think a little bit that, but it's, we're not learning or expanding. We're not getting educated on what's really, what our world really is, our country, our state, our city. Yeah, we're not learning. When I sit in that and I kind of look around, and it's not too often anymore, but I just.
Do you notice it then each time, or you do?
Especially in the last year or two.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
And I look back at just, 10 years ago, where I was more predominantly white circles that I was sitting in, and yeah, what ways to come from that, and I would not be comfortable sitting back in those situations again.
Mm-hmm. Suzanne, your point of view, because I remember a previous conversation you had, and you talked about your evolution. What is it like for you?
It's hard.
Explain that hardness to me, because again, I'm kind of slow sometimes.
I guess it's maybe a little stronger word than uncomfortable, but it's those situations where you know you're going to have to go against the grain if you want any kind of evolution to happen with the group. And sometimes that's hard. Sometimes depending on who the group is and how well do you know the group, and are these parents that you have to work with, you know, are they, you know, like school parents, or are they, you know, just parents that you have to deal with in the community, or yeah, particularly like, because I know it's the same. I know Sheila's, when they know that you're more, I don't want to say open, but more educated, or that where that race is important to you, it almost makes it even more uncomfortable, right?
Which I'm okay making them uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Like I'm okay with them being uncomfortable. I just, if we can't have those conversations and keep moving, then then step away, or I step away. There's just comes to a point where I don't have maybe this, I don't want to make the time to sit with you then.
I have the patience.
Because if you're not willing, and some people are willing to listen, some people are willing to talk, but some people aren't. And it's like, you know what, then we're going to keep moving and seeing, yeah, I'm just going to keep moving forward. Finding other people.
It's fascinating to hear you say, because like two quick things come to mind. One, I've sat in some government meetings where I would be the only African American in the room, and I felt like I was in a Klan meeting. I'm not being funny, I'm serious. I've sat in meetings where people will say things and I point it out and they all look at me like I said something wrong when they know I said something right, but they didn't have, they had the spine of a jellyfish and they wouldn't push back. And I've even had private conversations, but what really was mind-boggling, years ago, I was teaching in Black Studies and I walked by the administrative building and I went somewhere, I was on the second floor where the chancellor's office was, and he had a room for probably about 15 white administrators. And I was surprised to see all these white people in UNO building at this big table. And I know there's not one person of color. And when I went to class that evening, I told my class, I think I might have discovered a Ku Klux Klan meeting, and they started laughing. I said, but how is it that in UNO, where we live in a city that's 30% people of color, all the key administrators at UNO were all white? Or you go to the Department of Education, or you go to teacher education, and you got people who are teaching cultural studies and race studies who have never been to North or South Omaha in their life, and so on. So, and then what also bothers me is that when I can't even talk like this, sometimes I can crack a joke and they'll get it. But when you talk and you say what like you just said, they see you as negative or bad. And it's like, how do these people operate in the same reality that we do? And it's the uncomfortableness when you're the only one. And why would you be the only one in a tax-supported institution that's supposed to support all of us? So it's a different environment. We got to talk about it and deconstruct it.
Can I flip that on you?
Sure.
So one of the things that I probably struggle with when I deal with organizations is the organizations who do have the one Black person on the board or the one Black person in the office, and boy, they are diverse. Like, they claim it, right? They claim, I sensed a bit of that last week even. You know, it's one thing to hire and have someone on staff that's of a different culture, whether it's Black or Native American, and it's another thing to actually do work.
Right.
Like, I don't know. So I struggle, right?
No, you're right. And
you have to
I
hire
think
them, and they have to have a place at the table. But if all you're doing is giving them a seat at the table, and then I don't know. I struggle with, yeah.
But and here's another point that, and as addition to what you said, and I don't say but I said addition to that. Years ago when I was at Promise Ship, I asked a racial question as one of the senior directors in a community advisory meeting, and Karen Abrams was in the room as a white visitor or volunteer, whatever. She wasn't on staff, and I was. And the head of research for Promise Ship or Nebraska Family Collaborative at that time, when I raised the question, says, "Oh, Shema, I knew that question was going to come from you." I mean, it was about race or something. And we had, I think, a guest speaker was African American. So after it was all over, my colleague Karen came back to me later and says, "That was kind of racist what she asked you." You know, I felt bad about it. I said, "Why didn't you say something while you were there?" In other words, if I'm the only one, and obviously sometime when you're at work, there's only so much you can and cannot say when you got your boss in front of you, or so much you can say, obviously. But what is unfortunate is when you have the freedom to call things out and you want. I pay taxes. There's no excuse at my age that I've never seen a person of color counting cars on the street of Omaha, Nebraska. I'm 66 years old. How's that possible? At some point, when you give all these nepotism jobs to your friends and your cronies, how do other people get jobs? I was in a meeting in Lincoln one day where the guy worked for a major organization, like I mentioned, the name start with a B and an S or something, B and T, and talk about how he got, he said he shouldn't leave the room, but he told a story that was full of white privilege. And I'm like, it bothers me that he almost asked us for allegiance to go along with some of the racism that was said, when there should be other people of color in the room who may have access to these entities that use our fire stations, our police departments, and so on. So yeah, being the only one in the room, what good is that? I just got kicked off the ACLU board about a year ago because I was challenging them. Again, they're not used to Black men who are assertive talking about families. I can't make up the stuff you go through. So my point in sharing back to you is, how do we deconstruct it so these so-called organizations that serve our state, whether it be Appleseed, Voices of Children, ACLU, you name it, Legal Aid of Nebraska, have more than a token person of color on their board, but also their staff members have mileage where they've tracked in our community. Again, if you live on 199th Street, I don't expect you to go down to North or South Omaha every day, but in a given year, I bet the mortgage, you can't find these folks who've ever done anything in our community. So we don't want just a token one person, just like, in an all male group, you don't just bring one woman in there and say, oh, we got our woman. Come on now. If she's not going to be comfortable and she's not going to be able to speak truth to power, you kind of nullify her effectiveness as a person. So I just think these are issues we got to talk about. It's something we can deal with even more. I was going to switch up if I can, and it's a very important question I sometimes ask folks is, what does it feel like to deal with white guilt? What does that mean from a white perspective? Especially when I worked at Catholic Charities, they would talk about Catholic guilt, or they would talk about guilt. And again, that's a different kind of a phrase for somebody who's of color to understand from a racial point of view if you never had privilege. But talk to me about, what does white guilt mean? Have you ever experienced white guilt? Is it something that happens in your, as I say, your molecules, or is it one of those nuclei? Help me explain this white guilt that I hear people talk about. What does that mean?
I honestly wasn't aware of it until a few years ago. To me, it's knowing now, getting in my car, that I will probably be the least person to be pulled over.
Okay.
Going to a store, being profiled. That, and I know I don't, but now just being aware of it and being aware of my surroundings, that's the part, if you call it guilt, that's the part that's, for me, is the most, aware.
So Sheila, how can you deal with white guilt? I mean, is there something you could do to push back or make it not happen? Or can you ever move out of white guilt as a white person?
I mean, I don't know. I gotta think on that. Honestly, I think it's still being proactive. I don't,
Okay.
it's just constantly being proactive.
Susan, how would you address the concept of white guilt? Because it's something I like exploring and talking to white folks about, just to help me understand it. And I can't answer that.
I'm with Sheila. It's acknowledging when we're in those situations where it would be different if we were Black.
Okay.
It's kind of like, that, it's good to be uncomfortable. I think white guilt is okay because it reminds us that we live in a world that's not equal. Saturday night was homecoming, and after the dance, several kids with my son wanted to go eat at Buffalo Wild Wings, and it was late, and this lady goes to bed very early, but I took it upon myself with one other mother who was willing to do it, to bring them out there at 11 o'clock at night to have dinner, yada, yada. And it was packed. And so now it's 12:30 in the morning. My daughter and I are sitting in the parking lot waiting for them to come out of the restaurant. And they come out, and there's like 6 of them, 7 of them. And we're waiting for the other mom to come, right? So, because her and I were dividing and conquering to get all these kids home. And their 15-year-old boys. And so they're screwing around in the parking lot, right? They're not doing anything illegal, but they're having fun and they're hooting and hollering and they're kind of wrestling with each other. And I'm sitting in the car and my daughter's like, Mom, this makes me uncomfortable. And I said, why does it make you uncomfortable? She goes, because if somebody calls the cops, they're going to roll up here and they're going to see a group of young black men in a parking lot and they're going to assume that they're doing shit they're not supposed to do. And she's like, it just makes me scared because I don't know who's left in the restaurant, right? That we knew the restaurant closed. But either way, it was that moment right there, right? Like, and I had to get out of the car and like, okay, guys, let's, can we try to calm down? Can we all come stand closer to my car? Like, and because these kids are who these kids are, I didn't have to say why. I just said, just come stand closer to my car where I can, right? That's white guilt. If it was just my son and a few white kids, I would have not thought anything of it. But it was literally a group of black young men.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. One of the things I learned from our deep dive when we were doing that, and one of the things I've said many times is that many people of color, because there's lack of interracial engagement and conversation, authentic conversation, they don't hear these stories and they don't hear people share some of the powerful things that keep us divided. I was in a room a few years ago and a police officer said in front of the group, it was a public meeting, that I give the person a chance to empty their pockets before I take it downtown. Me being naive as I am, I repeated it. And somebody basically told me I was not supposed to repeat that. And secondly, when you look at systems where people of color make disproportionate in jail, in hospitals, in different negative situations, reverse engineer shows that something is wrong in our society. And so we need to be able to talk about that if we're going to increase it. I love the concept of cancer. How are you going to address cancer if you don't talk about it? It's that you just got to deal with it. So yeah, it's just one of those things.
Something I want to go back on that. Something I have really heard a lot in the last year, and it's not guilt, but I've heard white women are the most dangerous people in our country. And I say our country, I don't know if it's worldwide, but I specifically see it, I think sometimes in our city. And I bring it around smaller just because I haven't lived a lot of other places, but that right there, knowing that, it makes me even just 100 times more wanting to be proactive when I walk out of my door, to relinquish that kind of power.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And yeah, I wanted to add that. I think that was a huge awakening moment of realizing if white women had that much power. Yeah.
You mentioned that one question of mine is, can you point to any time in your life where you've had white privilege or some benefit that you got that a person of color didn't get, a specific incident? And I can come to a case where an African-American gave me the hookup, as we say, some benefit because I was an African-American. I remember one time at a graduation and somebody did something for me that they said, because you're a brother from another mother and we both from the same, like that. I remember one time, and I don't remember too many other times in my life where, because of the color of my skin, another person of color gave me that benefit per se. I've had the opposite happen to me. But the question is, can you point to an example where you've gotten some little benefit because of this color of your skin?
I have to think on that, but verbally, I've never had that said, but I am sure at one point it has happened without my being aware of it.
Okay.
Not probably, I would have been more aware in the last few years and would have spoke up or stepped away. I wouldn't even, how I personally would have handled, probably wouldn't have taken it or done anything with it. But I'm pretty sure it has happened. I just was not verbally, as a white person, it doesn't get said very often.
You just do it, it just happens. Susan, can you think of any time in your lifetime that you can remember somebody give you a benefit was specifically because of the whiteness of your skin? Oh.
It's hard to call it out because, but I think through sports, and Sheila, I was thinking of this with you, with your daughter, right? we've seen the difference of when they play on a team that's predominantly Black versus when they play on a team that's white. Most recently, I was in a store buying homecoming clothes for Evan and a couple of his friends. And the two friends who happened to be Black were walking out of the store and the security alarms went off, right? You know, when you walk through the little thing. And it happens to me all the time at Target, wherever, right? You walk out, they missed something. But to see the fear on them, especially the younger of the two, when that security went on and stopped and turned and I was like, oh, come here, you know, and I just immediately started walking towards them to grab the bags from them. And the lady who checked me out obviously knew I had paid for all of it. And so she was, oh, ma'am, I'm so, you like kept apologizing to me over and over. And I said, well, actually, we should apologize to them because they're the ones that just got, you know, literally stopped. I mean, like had this, no one came up to them, but you know what I mean? I said, we should apologize to them because they're the ones that were carrying the sacks out. But it immediately hit me like, I don't know that she treated me differently because I'm white, but she was apologizing to me, right? Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah, would have that happened if I hadn't been there to intervene? I don't know.
Well, and Suzanne and Sheila, as we talk about this, is you know, even though sometimes I can misinterpret things, oftentimes things happen so often that we can point to specifics when you become conscious. And one example coming to mind is I know a sister, not a sister, but a nun sister, who told me the police officer stopped her when he found out she was a nun, he didn't give her the ticket. Then I had another example where people told me they just talked to the officer a certain way and, you know, kind of flirt with them. And we're talking this in classes here where students are telling me examples where they actually, the police officer, even though they were speeding, she said, the police officer didn't give her a ticket. Actually, they asked for the phone number. And that happened. And again, I can only repeat what was shared with me. And then I had another incident where there was a young student who's from Gambia. We was in a Black Studies class probably about 5 years ago, and he was in a small town, and he stopped to ask the police officer for directions because he got lost. And the police officer started asking for ID and searching and everything else. And it's like, how does that work? And if I didn't know who this student was, I would have thought he made it up. You know, how do you stop a police officer asking for directions? Next thing you know, he's patting you down and checking you out. So there are some things we need to be conscious of. And again, it's like, what they use a term, something like executive privilege, or a word they use where they don't give each other tickets, but it's just one of those concepts. You recently talked about, again, you talked about your relative in the Facebook and so on, and then you talked about closure and how you moved away from that, and you kind of defined that family situation. Will you ever go back to that, Sheila, that incident you guys talked about? And would that ever come back up again in other circles for you where you have to deal with Facebook and social media and race issues? Or do you just completely leave it alone when it gets too hot?
I would totally get involved. I don't allow myself enough time on social media anymore.
Wait, help me about that. What does that mean? What does that mean?
I just, how busy I am, and I'm not always on my phone or computer all day long. I don't sit at a desk. I don't sit, you know, I sit in a private room with a client, you know, and so I'm not on social media as I used to be, you know, during that year of, you know, so, but yeah, what's funny is when I responded to her, I used to comment on a lot of things, and I was always interacting a lot more. I had more time, and I was like, wow, this is exhausting. How do people do this all day long or all the time? Like, it takes up so much time, and that's the kind of time I don't have. So unfortunately, I don't use social media on that route anymore. I try to, but no, that's not any of my platforms anymore that I use my voice.
Yeah. Susan, do you use social media at any point?
I do, but not as much as I used to. When I do post racial stuff, I'll be honest, I have very low patience tolerance. And so if you come back posting something stupid, and I think you're somebody that really doesn't want to learn, I just delete the comment. Okay. Like, I don't. If it's somebody who I think is asking me a legit question, I will message them like sidebar and say, can we have a discussion? But if it's somebody who's just making some racist jackass comment,
you move on.
I don't have time. Yeah.
One of the things I hear white folks talk about the concept of being an ally. And I was in a discussion where someone talked about being an ally, but they didn't really do anything and so on. And they really never busted a grape on racial justice issues. I'm not trying to be funny here. How do you define an ally from your perspective? What is an ally? And you could pick any topic you want, but what is an ally to you from your worldview, particularly if you're talking to our viewing audience and they want to be allies? What would you give as examples or indicators of allies? And again, pick your topic.
So this one for me, because of another nonprofit I'm involved in, I actually give community talks about how to be an ally. I have given it to several Omaha companies. Those talks are around LGBTQ issues. But the same applies. I've had conversations using many of the slides that I use in that presentation about race, because it's the same thing. You're involved, right? You're involved, you show support, you engage in conversation, and you're willing to learn. That's probably one of the ones that a lot of sometimes white people forget, right? They claim they're an ally and they post a bunch of articles, but you have to be open to listen and accept, I guess.
Yeah. Sheila, how do you define ally?
So there's a lady I have followed on different social media platforms, and she's a Black woman, and she has said there's no such thing as an ally, just from her life experiences, and she's a very powerful motivational speaker, and so I question myself, how am I an ally? Am I an ally? But to me, right now it's voicing, it's stepping in when I don't even know how to go with that. It's stepping in when someone else needs help with their voice. It's getting involved, keep educating yourself, keep listening. That's the biggest thing too, is we need to stop and listen. We always think we have our opinion. We have our opinions on everything. And I'm going to use it as a white person. We need to stop talking and just listen, because right now we're just a bunch of white noise. I think we just need to shut up.
And that's a good metaphor, white noise. That's funny. I like that, how you slip that in.
But if to be an ally, I think it's just a start is to start listening, start educating yourself, start there, quit voicing your opinion.
I got you. We alluded to, I think, Suzanne, when you talked about the issue of sexual orientation, and one of my questions is, how do you deal with the complex issue of sexual orientation and race? Some people say that they're the same. Some people say they're different areas that you navigate. You don't know my sexual orientation until I talk about it, or you just articulate it a certain way. And my question is sexual orientation the same as racial oppression? Again, we can have different points of view, but I like to throw it out because I've seen circles where people lost their shirt just in the basic conversation about it. So from your vantage point, how do you define that dichotomy or that issue of racial oppression or racial orientation versus sexual orientation?
I think you said the obvious, right? I mean, skin color, right? You can't hide that you're Black or you're Native American or, so on that hand, some would say that being gay or being LGBTQ in general is easier, right? Because you don't have to constantly face the backlash. But on the other hand, living from personal experience, I will say living in the closet is maybe worse for some people, right? Not being able to live who you really are because you have to hide who you really are, doesn't allow freedom of themselves, and leads to a much higher percentage of suicide attempts in LGBTQ youth because they are not able to live out as who they want to be. the other thing that I find often when I'm talking with folks is, LGBTQ, a lot of that pushback is religious, right? A lot of that pushback is often stemmed from religion, which I think is very hard, particularly for people who have maybe grown up in the church, and then they, as young adults, recognize that they themselves are LGBTQ. It's very hard to reconcile that. So yeah, I think there's similarities. I think in some ways it's easier to be LGBT, but on the other hand, hiding is no way for anyone to live, right?
Mhm. Wow, thank you. One thing that some years back, I had a presentation at UNO and I was talking about, and I said even today, in my lifetime, I never really heard a LGBTQ person speak about race. Even people of color who identify with different sexual orientation. Second thing related to that is, you know, I don't know what it's like if I'm not you or I'm not your experience, or I can't project what it's like to be a woman or what women go through. But through my friends or through my spouse or through my daughter or my sister and so on, I could learn a great deal. But what I find unfortunate is that in the year 2020, we have these divisions and there's very few institutions that brought these worlds together. I'm not trying to be funny, but the reason why you have some of these craziness happen because folks have not learned how to navigate the conversations. And I have met some people LGBTQ as race as a clan. And my point that sometimes you point back to me is if you're a person of color, a person of different sexual orientation, you think we would know what it's about and be much more forthcoming and address it. But I will say, in fact, that there are very few bridge builders. And this is why I think this conversation is so important, because if we're going to deal with the great divide, it means we're going to have to stop arguing and fighting in the burning houses that African proverb goes. But as long as folks don't come and deal with these organizations that have not done a great job of bringing our worlds together, you're going to see the Trumpites and those orange people kick us in the butt. And for African Americans, 450 years of oppression and racial slavery, you name it, Jim Crowism is a bitter pill to expect us to circumvent, particularly when you're dealing with folks who, again, use their privilege to push back. We're getting close to the, go ahead. Did I want to say something? Go ahead.
No, I want to, because it brought me back to something that Sheila said earlier about white women being the most dangerous. That's probably one huge advantage that LGBTQ folks have, is that they've got white women on their side.
Wow.
For the most part, right? I mean, I think it's not saying there's still a lot of hate, and I tell you, I deal with the youth every month, but I think the white progressive women of the world truly, they want to be supportive of the LGBT community. They don't know how to be supportive of race. So
wow.
Yeah.
Well, if we start teaching real culture and humility studies, and we have real people teaching instead of the artificial fakeites or the carpetbaggers or people who have no skin in the game, we might grow. In other words, if I want to learn about carpentry, I get a carpenter. If I want to learn about different agendas about how to be a plumber, you name it, whatever field you pick. I don't know how to sew, but if I want to learn how to sew, I got to know somebody who's a seamstress or who is a tailor, whatever. And too often we keep bringing these half-baked individuals who don't have a clue, and nothing's more insulting when you grow up in a community and somebody comes in off an airplane and they pay them $5,000 for talking for 1 hour, and at the end of the day you're still stuck with stupid in the community because we haven't addressed these issues. I was going to ask you, did you want to say something, Sheila? I'm looking at your nonverbal.
I'm listening.
Okay. Nope. One of the things that we hear today is woke, being a woke, and how do you keep yourself fresh on a cutting edge dealing with racial equity and anti-racism in this community? And Sheila, you alluded to it as well as you, Suzanne, but how do you stay fresh? And initially you used the example of your offsprings or your daughter and so on, but how do you really stay awoke? And again, Sheila, you also alluded to following some a woman who's on the web or whatever, who's a specialist on that, but what are ways that you stay fresh or on dealing with these issues that talk about race?
Well, I'll use well, I don't know if this is a good example, but the whole issue with Texas right now and the abortion laws, and all these rallies, this rally that they're trying to bring up come October. and I've started looking into some of it, and one of the biggest things I've again read or heard is we need to listen to women of color and women of other cultures with all of this. As white women, we want to voice our opinions right away again on all this subjects. And Black women have been, and Indigenous women have been screaming at us for a long time about these issues. I don't know if that's cutting edge, but that's part of it. Of again, we're listening to they're not wrong people. We need to shift our who we need to listen to, and keep giving them the voice instead of using our own at this point. Because if we keep, as white women, we keep using our voice, we're not changing anything. We're not, honestly, I don't see it changing. It's just a different white woman using her voice, but.
Different white woman, okay. You sort of phrase. Susan, how do you stay woke, or how do you stay on cutting edge?
I think really just continuing to try to be uncomfortable, right? Like trying to push myself into those situations. There's a young man that goes to the high school with Evan that doesn't play football, but is at the games. And so every game he comes running up to me and he always hugs me and he always says, "Let me see your shirt," because he almost always knows that's either going to say Black Lives Matter or it's going to have some kind of Rosa Parks saying or something to that extent. And he's always like, "You always wear the coolest clothes and I just love you." And last week after the game, I shared the story about the game, last week, but then so we had another game this last Friday night. And I think people were on edge just because, right, we came off of a bad and this kid is standing with me after the game, and our other sister was with us, and she was asking some questions, and he said, "I love the fact that Evan's mom, the I'm referred to as mom, has like Black Lives Matter stickers in her car, and like everybody knows where she stands." And he said her and I have the best conversations because she's not afraid to call a white person a racist, or she's not afraid to and as we're standing there, we're kind of watching, there's always several police officers, and they're trying, and for legit reasons, they're trying to get kids out of the parking lot, right? Game's over, let's go home, let's get out of here. But we're watching, and he's like, "Come with," it's almost like it's become a game with him. Like, "You and we're going to walk up in there, and I'll bet you them cops ain't going to say a word to me. You watch, because I'm with you." And so we will, and they won't, and we'll watch them stopping and talking to other, and it could be just because I'm an old lady that is with him, or it could be because I'm a white lady that's with him. I don't know. But I think just, I'm constantly trying to have those, even though he's a kid, like I learned probably more from him than I do. Yeah, it's amazing.
Wow. We are, one of the things I was going to ask you up front, have you ever gotten pushback from a racist? And then if you so, what is that like? Or give you an example of this pushback from what you would call a racist.
I don't know that I have directly. Like, I don't know that I've had a verbal, right? I've had people, I was at an event last week and I had a Black Lives Matter shirt on, and there was a lady sitting next to me that had some kind of flag, All Lives Matter shirt. She wasn't right next to me, but she was like 3 down. And I sat thinking, oh, I know she saw me when I sat down, and I don't think she was the most like happy with the shirt I was wearing. And I have people, not all the time, but frequently, somebody will drive by me and they'll honk and they'll flip me off, or they'll make some, vulgar comment yelling at me. And half the time I'm like, what did I cut someone off? And my kids are always like, "It's the stickers, Mom, it's the stickers."
Well.
Oh. And then they'll drive by and I'll see like a Trump sticker in their window or something that indicates, oh yeah, that's why they're upset.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I have. back when, and I keep going back to 2020, but I actually had a client come in, and I have come to realize I can't let friend requests on Facebook with clients, because some of it doesn't end well. But he confronted me with what was going on within our country, and tried pushing me back of my, supporting Black Lives Matter. And he was trying to tell me incidences where he thinks that white people should be able to use certain terminology and certain words. And I just was shocked. And he told me an incident where he did it with a couple of guys he knew, and they were just like, yeah, you can't do that. But then he eventually brought it onto social media, and came at me on different posts at different times. And finally he sent me a private message, and I didn't even read the whole thing. It was like 3 paragraphs long, and then he blocked me. He sent it and then blocked me. He was so angry with what I was standing for. And okay. But I've had other clients, and I say this because sometimes it's hard to service people when we have a lot of these different aspects and views of humanity. And some of them asked if it is still okay that I come to get services from you, knowing that, am I cut off? And I've had some serious conversations with some of them. But yeah, anyway, that's the only one I've had really push back on, calling out what I believe in, and what humanity is.
Folks, we're up on our last question. I usually ask my guests also, do you have any closing comments for our viewing audience?
I'll say what I think I say every time that I'm interviewed with you, Ajamal, or I'm in a class, is get involved. If you mentioned it earlier, but if you live at 180th and Center, or even further out, what are you doing? Like, it's great that you are vocal, but it's easy for me because I have kids, and I think the same with Sheila, right? I mean, it's easier when you have activities to get you, and she lives in, but too many people don't go out of their way, right? They just don't get involved. Go eat, make a pledge that you're not going to eat at a restaurant that's west of 72nd or south of Dodge, for a period of time, or that you're going to consciously, when you need to hire someone to do work at your house, or that you are looking for whatever it is, that you're going to try to seek out minority-based businesses. I think we're a lot of talk, but not a lot of action. And it doesn't have to be in your face action, right? It doesn't have to be confronting. Small steps.
Good, thank you. Sheila, any closing comments for our viewing audience?
I'm going to agree with you. I think you have to go to your restaurants, go support businesses, but I think it goes further than that, especially within our own city, in our state. Right now we're talking about they're wanting to change the district for voting, and I've had different people comment, and even one person said to me, I think I need to get involved. And it's like, yes, like again, all your posts, all your comments are great, but this is where you have to get involved. You have to get
not actually writing your senators. It doesn't do any good to complain about it. Yeah.
No, and you got to get uncomfortable. The people sitting out on different parts of Omaha, you guys are really comfortable and not seeing the whole aspect of it. Yeah.
And you're missing such an incredible experience. Like, yeah.
I really appreciate y'all today sharing with issues related to race healing, racial healing, and dealing with race relations, and talking about experience from your own perspectives that we can listen to and particularly get our viewing audience. but I'll leave the viewing audience with a couple of points. One is I asked a simple question. Can you name 3 times in the past year that you've done something to help other people from a different racial group? 3 times in the whole year. Number 2, have you studied or read or participated in an activity where you were the only one? And then the last one is, have you had a decent conversation with somebody across a meal who's different from you, whether it be from another country, you name it? And these are simple opportunities for us to grow as individuals. And I must point back to myself. Sometimes I'm not always the best person, but I try to do the best I can. But I really appreciate you coming forward and talking about your experiences with us on our program. And we hope to get other chances to do that again. But thank you both, Suzanne and Sheila, for helping us to kind of understand some of these issues that we need to be tackling as a community, because in this day and age, it seems bleak. But again, I know that we have a lot of hope and expectations for that next generation, including our own. So thank you for being with us tonight.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of our program. For more, join us again for another one. Barocco.